Now, when it comes to Drake, Kendrick Lamar, and 50 Cent. Now, if you are ready to see how with 50 Cent being outside doing interviews for his documentary on the downfall of Diddy, well, he has been asked some questions about Kendrick Lamar and Drake, and with this, all in the effort of trying to cope for his buddy Cupcake Karen, he has ended up disrespecting the current king of rap and showing that even with somebody of his stature, well, he can't fathom the fact that Kendrick is on top. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe because seriously, as we are seeing in real time a line in rap divide and see how so many different MCs from so many different eras and cloths of hip-hop, well, are just livid about the success that Kendrick Lamar is seeing and are hating on him in the most pathetic ways, really make sure to leave a like before we go any further because I do think it's important to just see how Kendrick Lamar makes these rappers go mad within a way that, in my estimation, we have never seen somebody who has held the crown in hip-hop get legends and people within the game more livid overall. And really, when you discover why and when you get to how 50 Cent defended Drake here, you realize so much more than we ever once knew and so much more than we originally expected when this entire beef started, because honestly, with the way 50 Cent talks about Drake here, it's pretty much all but confirmed that 50 was directly coaching Drake on how to go against Kendrick Lamar and helped him try to sabotage Kendrick's career as a whole. But before we go any further into that, let's just look into what 50 Cent directly said and how he did it, which now, while I can't show the clip of this interview, it all went down between 50 and Ari Melber, who you may have seen on the news always referencing and quoting hip-hop. He is an absolutely huge hip-hop fan and he loves to speak to rappers as much as he can, and well, as 50 Cent is doing his press tour for his new documentary on the downfall of Diddy, which in of itself is just a whole other thing that we don't really have time to discuss today. Well, by somebody who is a hip-hop fan and who isn't just there to speak to 50 about the most salacious stuff all around Diddy, he seemingly asked him some questions about what's going on in the larger rap landscape, and of course, as the biggest thing in hip-hop for the last year or two at this point has been Kendrick versus Drake and just all of the aftermath of that, well, that's exactly what he spoke to 50 about, and what he ended up questioning 50 with was a simple but important statement to ask somebody who has held a crucial position in hip-hop years ago, which, well, was this on the Kendrick and Drake beef. Was it ultimately good for hip-hop or mixed? And now here is what 50 Cent says, and we have the quote, so let's just read it. I think it's great for hip-hop, and there's the competitive nature there. It's not, he said, you gotta compete for the number one slot. Even though when you're in the top, you gotta hit record, there's still 10 people there. We don't know who the best one is. And that part is kind of all right, and it really does just feel like he's speaking to the rules of hip-hop and just the understanding of the game in a certain way, but here is where things get weird and where the entire context of everything changes. Drake is in a position where he's delivered so much consistently that the audience is resisting his material. It's not a bad song, it's just they are deciding not to receive the way because of the climate. And with this, once again, we are seeing a rapper, and at that, one who was even bigger than Drake in his prime, and who was one of the biggest and most dominant rappers for a few years that we have ever seen. And honestly, you can make that statement go bigger than hip-hop and really say all of music. And well, despite the status that 50 once held, and honestly, despite him being one of the most competitive rappers of all time, who would have never caped for himself like this, and who would have found any way to try and win a beef or back and forth, which I mean is why he's sitting here with this whole thing with Diddy, and it's why he's doing all of this now and even in the position to speak. Well, even with all of that, we see 50 contradict what he always stood for when he was actually within the prime of his rap career, and instead just try to make this lousy excuse for Drake to try and write off why he hasn't really been doing too well this past year, and why he lost the beef as a whole. And just with this, there is a lot to unpack here just in terms of how he is trying to diminish the loss that Drake took and try to make it sound like it was something that was derived from the system capitalism and the nature of the climate in hip-hop, as opposed to just one rapper being better, smarter, and just doing everything greater than the other. But really, I think it's so disappointing, and really, after seeing 50 run with this narrative that so many other older and younger rappers have tried to use, all to defend Drake like it's their job or like everything depends on it, I'm really gonna go in, because this is just absolutely baffling to the state of hip-hop and just showing how much the culture has really lost the plot and how people have just been consumed by the industry games and, well, picking their favorites as opposed to actually pushing for the truth in this thing and actually standing on the rules and the merit of the culture that every single person who gets to speak on this level has benefited from, and what it's always stood for and how you have always needed to follow it. Because seriously now, whether it's been Young Thug or 21 Savage or The Game, 50 Cent here, and there have been so many others. You could put Lil Baby on that list, you could even put J. Cole on that list, and you could really go on about all these guys who have sneak dissed Kendrick and tried to diminish what he's done in some sort of a way. I mean, it's all just so weird. And you know, I almost do want to give 50 Cent a little credit, because at least in this interview, he says it with a smile on his face and actually is acting like he believes it, which I guess is the manipulator and tactician in him. But when all these other guys do it, they look down, they get all insecure looking, and they just look like they are having a temper tantrum, kind of like the way Ish on the Joe Budden podcast gets when he gets checked, for those who are fans of that show. But to get to the point of why it's so disappointing to see 50 Cent talk like this, even though we know he has been Team Drake, and honestly, he really may have been Drake's closest ally throughout this entire beef from when Like That dropped all the way until now, is just because you are sitting here to all of our faces, and it's never just that Kendrick Lamar got a win in this beef, but you know, maybe Drake is better overall, which I don't agree with that, and I don't think most rap fans do. But if you wanted to say that, it's at least more of a respectable stance and acknowledges the clear facts that Kendrick Lamar won the rapping and lyrical competition. But it's not even that. And again, what is so baffling and what really does show how mad everybody is about Kendrick's success, and if it was the other way around, I'm sure how they would not stop talking about how great Drake is, well, all just does come down to the very way that they try to cope and justify with the fact that Kendrick won, which is all around this sort of shadow presence, industry games, and just clear manipulation and tricks that were played, which ultimately is just supposed to be some sort of a diversion from the fact that Kendrick was better. Because if we just look at the quote 50 said, when you look at what he says about Drake, he justifies Drake losing and Kendrick getting the win here by the convenience of a moment that was all just set up against him, as explaining Drake losing and explaining this beef by saying Drake is in a position where he's delivered so much consistently that the audience is resisting his material. That's one of the worst arguments I have ever heard, and really just one of the saddest ways to try and cope with the fact that you've lost, you're out of options, and you're creatively bankrupt that I have ever heard. Because even in hip-hop in of itself, rappers have showed that in terms of being superstars and in terms of being some of the faces of the entire not just hip-hop industry but music industry, you can really dominate commercially and critically and culturally for as long as you want to. And you know, when I just think about the greats in hip-hop who have dominated for a long time and think if their material was ever resisted like 50 Cent is referring to, well, the only time that it's actually been resisted and listeners have not been able to accept it or they haven't been ready for it, again, when it's not bad music, like let's just say some of Eminem or Jay-Z who were absolute superstars, or even 50 Cent, when they released albums that were just mediocre or bad, well, then people resisted that. But aside from releasing bad music, unless somebody like a Kanye was releasing a Yeezus or Kendrick a Mr. Morale, the fans don't resist great music unless it's ahead of its time, and unless it's so experimental like those albums that people are just not really ready to fathom what they are hearing and what they are trying to process. And so to bring that back to Drake, when I'm talking about Mr. Morale and Yeezus, and those are real albums from superstars that people resisted in terms of being the mainstream statements that their other albums from the artists were, I mean, Drake is not releasing an album that is even slightly risky, slightly experimental, and he's not doing anything that's slightly different. So to sit here and try to say that people didn't enjoy the Iceman singles or SSS for You or even the tracks during the beef because he has delivered so consistently that the audience is resisting his material, that is a lie. That is a sheer and bold-faced lie, and the claim makes absolutely no sense because really with what Drake has done, he hasn't been consistently great, but he has consistently delivered the same exact type of music, which you could call like the Marvel movie-ication of rap, where again, he wasn't breaking the mold and you kind of knew exactly what you were getting and you kind of knew the exact box that he was going to play in, whether it was pop rap, pop R&B, or whatever in between that he was stealing from. But again, it was always so safe and derivative of what was the norm and what everybody else was doing. It was so easily acceptable. And honestly, the most close comparison that I could really equate to this is somebody like Future, who around the same time and in the same era as Drake has consistently done high numbers by releasing music that sonically and aesthetically, well, has pretty much consistently been the same thing, and nobody has rejected him really. And he has always had big hits pretty much every time he has stepped out with a project or just within a major era in his career. And you know why people haven't rejected Future and why they've rejected Drake? Well, because one's music has gotten exponentially worse while the other has hovered around the same bar of quality that they have delivered on for a long time in their career. And so I say all of that to say, I am just absolutely tired of getting around the point when it comes to a lot of these big players in hip-hop that Kendrick Lamar beat Drake fair and square. He just outsmarted him in every corner, and Drake could have, in a vacuum, done the exact same thing and won the beef. But again, he just did not take the proper steps to outwork Kendrick Lamar in a lyrical back and forth and within this rap chess game where again, so much was on the line. And that's really what's so frustrating because it's so obvious now that Kendrick and Drake was the biggest rap beef of all time and honestly, maybe the biggest moment in the entertainment industry, at least of the 2020s decade so far. And so to understand the stakes of it all and the scale, and then to try and say that the guy who ended up winning only won on a technicality, it's just so disingenuous. And honestly, whether you say you're hip-hop or not, it is one of the most anti-hip-hop things you could do because it's just putting a bad stain on the culture just in terms of what you are saying really represents it, as you are deprioritizing the biggest rap moment away from the art and away from the things that actually made it as compelling and as legendary as it was. And again, you're trying to say that some tricks were pulled or there was some weird fatigue that people had for Drake, which is why Not Like Us became arguably the biggest rap song of the entire century. And you know, it's honestly very funny because as the game has also been dissing and taunting Kendrick Lamar recently, and now 50 Cent is as well, whatever their differences have always been, the game and 50 do seem to be on the same page ideologically in terms of their disdain for Kendrick Lamar, which is that again, both of them had good relationships with Kendrick Lamar leading up to this beef and leading up to when Kendrick became the undisputed king of the genre and did things that no other rapper ever did, whether it's the Super Bowl or the stadium tour. And really what it seems like is after this moment where Kendrick took down the guy Drake, who they all loved or all thought was untouchable, and then got those achievements which went higher than any rapper has ever went, they all of a sudden seem to just turn on him, try to resort his success to industry games and tricks, and have started to cope for Drake way more than they ever have. And I think really with 50 Cent and his disdain and weird beef for Kendrick Lamar, it does mirror the games in a lot of ways, as I do believe it all comes from this same principle and notion that, well, if Kendrick Lamar was the number 3 guy, the number 7 guy, the number 15 guy in rap, or even the number 2 guy, they were okay with his position and they were okay with his success. But now that somebody like him has become the number 1, they can't handle it. And the reason why this really seems to be, and I think it makes more and more sense the more we see people talk about him, is because for Kendrick Lamar, it's not what he's doing, but it's about how he did it and how he got there in the first place. Which, what I mean by this is that from Drake to pretty much every other rapper and every other artist in the history of the music industry, when you get within a label and you're trying to chase superstardom and you're trying to become the biggest name you could possibly be, it often requires compromising your own values and your own morals, and well, just selling out and doing absolutely ridiculous stuff that does not embody who you are and that compromises your core values and maybe even why you got into this industry and career in the first place, all to try and chase something that really, when you do it the wrong way, just will turn you into the worst and most superficial version of yourself, which I mean is exactly how Drake did end up getting what he got. And I mean, when you see in a music industry, even when you think about the things Drake has had to do to try and retain the spot he once held, which pretty much featured him stealing and copying from every cloth of music around, using as many people as possible to make these big albums where he was encompassing so many different things to try and appeal to as many people as possible. And then, I mean, we just saw all of the other ridiculous things Drake did, which simultaneously had him trying to move like a Taylor Swift adjacent, but then also as this huge tough guy and bad guy at the same time. Well, after Drake and, 50 Cent was once the biggest rapper in the world at a point, he knows what it took to reach that level and the things that he had to do, which I mean, with how everywhere 50 Cent was within his prime, which you could argue he was the biggest rapper for like a few years at a point. Well, with all of that and also with the image that the industry tried to portray more, which I mean, you could listen to 50's first album and you could see, despite it obviously having massive mainstream appeal, it is still very unapologetically him. Even on The Massacre, you see how the industry was forcing him to kind of flanderize his characteristics a little more, and then really focus in on creating certain types of music that, well, when you water them down and you are making them for the sole purpose of making them, really do water themselves down and make themselves some of the most superficial things you can in this space. And I say all of that to say, when you see what 50 and what Drake had to do to get on top, and you see the absolutely ridiculous songs that they had to make over the years, and you see the absolutely ridiculous things they had to do, and then you compare it to Kendrick Lamar, who got to play Man at the Garden at the Super Bowl, which I mean, while I could say so much else, I think that really does encapsulate a lot of the divide and a lot of the reasons why so many of these people who have been used and corrupted by the industry just hate him, which if I got to break it down a little further, all does come down to the fact that despite being the biggest rapper in the world and despite taking hip-hop to places that nobody ever did, well, Kendrick Lamar has never just had to make anthems like Drake and 50 were forced to and like so many other stars in this industry have needed to, but he has been able to literally become a more free artist who can create anything he wants and who can go in any direction at any time. And just when you see that and even see the image that Kendrick has been able to portray and push as the face of rap compared to 50 and Drake, who again were both pushed to be these tough guys and then also these guys who were always in the club, and that was pretty much the peak of their personality in terms of what the industry wanted to push them as, which was just for people, for the girls to like, and then to the guys to feel tough. I mean, again, when you see that and then see how complex and multifaceted Kendrick Lamar has been able to be while climbing higher and higher within this field, you get why the jealousy is there, because it all does start to become very obvious and very apparent. And it's honestly just surreal when you think about it and even see how deep this all runs. And honestly, with that, when people try to make up all these fake stats to try and hype up Drake and act like he is so great, to me, when you just see how jealous all of these people who pretty much sold out to the industry are, that Kendrick Lamar has done more than them, is bigger than them, and holds a higher place in the ladder than them, and yet he is still the same guy he was when they met him in the early 2010s. That drives them absolutely mad, and they really don't like that. And I just think about when I hear 50 Cent, or when I hear Joe and Jada talking, or when I hear Drake, or Lil Baby, or Young Thug, or even J. Cole, and a lot of others. This is why they are so mad at Kendrick, and this is why they continue and will continue to put smut on his name, and it's all because of how he did it. And honestly, when I just think about the position Kendrick Lamar holds as the leader of hip-hop and see how all of these people perceive what he is doing and see how people constantly try to coach his career and tell him what to do. This is why I think with Kendrick Lamar, there is really nobody who can tell him what to do but himself in terms of the direction to go forward with in his career. And I say that because he has been able to climb higher than anybody else while following his own path. And even when you think about like the rises that Drake and 50 had, while they almost became like pop stars the bigger and bigger they got, and with that, the actual hip-hop principles that built them were diluted. And then again, they became more adjacent to a Taylor Swift or a Beyonce, however you want to frame it and however you want to face it. That may in of itself be the reason why Kendrick Lamar has been able to get hip-hop to a point that really nobody has ever gotten close to, maybe besides Kanye West and Eminem, in terms of just catapulting the genre to stages that we have never seen. And really when you just think about the way Kendrick has carried hip-hop's principles and brought them to these places where it's gotten more exposure, and again, people haven't seen the flanderized, garbage, watered-down version of hip-hop, and they've actually seen the real thing and its real principles created, pushed forward, and instilled in these places that, again, everybody freaked out that he even got to. That's why 50 Cent and that's why all of these other guys will continue to try and cope and cape for Drake, and it's because when they see Drake, they do ultimately see a version of themselves that just play the industry games the best and climb the highest they could have if they just continue to sell out and compromise every single thing that ever made them them. And I say all that to say that with 50 Cent, no matter how much of a legend some of his earlier stuff made him, and no matter how funny and honestly good it is that he is exposing people like Diddy, because somebody should be calling this out, and even with you being from hip-hop, I still gotta give him credit as being one of the few rappers, and especially superstars at that, whether he's doing it for the right or wrong reasons, to just say that this is not right. With that said, when you speak on the current guy who is taking everything that you're supposed to love and push forward to the highest place we have ever seen, and with your support, who knows maybe where rap could look, it's honestly just shameful and sad that so many of these guys continue to disrespect Kendrick. But honestly, as Kendrick Lamar told us on good credit, the hate get realer, the love get fake, but when you're this great, that's how you should like it. And so with all that said, let me know. What do you think about 50 Cent speaking about Kendrick Lamar like this, what this is exposing about the music industry, and what do you think the totality of this is all ultimately going to ensure? Now listen, if you made it to this point in the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. And if you want to see now how right before this, well, just before 50 Cent was hating on Kendrick, the game was hating on Kendrick, and not just in interviews originally like we saw 50 here, but, well, Game made an entire album where he has not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 entire songs where he is talking and dissing Kendrick Lamar, and with it, I think we very well may get a Kendrick Lamar response very soon. You're not going to want to miss this one, so check out the suggested video.